Good afternoon. This is Stephanie Giardo, Event and Education Consultant here at NAMIC, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Lowering Your Loss Ratio with Embedded Claim Analytics, Best Practices from Leading Insurers. We want to give a warm welcome to all of you who are joining us today. Before we dive into the main content, let's quickly go over some important details. Today's webinar will last approximately 1 hour. You can find a copy of the presentation by clicking on the handout section located on the right side of your screen. Should you encounter any technical difficulties during the webinar, please don't hesitate to use the live support option found in the upper right corner of your screen. A member of our NAMIC team will be there to assist you. In the event that either of our presenters face technical challenges, we'll remain online until the connection is restored and the webinar can proceed. We appreciate your patience and encourage you to stay connected with us as well. Please take notice that we do operate under our antitrust statement, which you can find outlined on this slide. The antitrust policy will guide this conversation, and we kindly request that you follow its guidelines when submitting questions to our presenters. Along those same lines, all of our presenters are sharing their experience and opinions, which should not be construed as specific advice. We love participation, and we encourage you to participate in today's webinar by asking questions. If you'd like to ask a question, simply submit it through the live Q&A feature on the right side of your screen. Our presenters will answer as many questions as possible at the conclusion of their presentation. And now we'd like to welcome our presenters, Ryan Park-Grant and Alex Ryckebusch. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone joining. My name is Ryan Park-Grant. I am a product manager at Guidewire Software. And when I joined Guidewire about 12 years ago, it was from an economic consulting and data analysis background to work on a project where we were benchmarking claims metrics across companies. And we were able to see, working with a lot of the insurers that we work with, that there were big differences in claims KPIs across indemnity, expense, recovery, cycle times. But there was a kind of a curtain across why. We could see this detailed data that people were achieving, different, better results, sometimes high in one place, low in another. And we would go talk to these customers and learn about their processes and what they were doing that led to these results. I then moved into a role as a product manager where I am now helping customers to insurers to embed analytics at the point of decision and action, which is what we're going to talk about today, and to kind of roll back that curtain and see how insurers are actually impacting their workflow and making changes to their processes. Alex?
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex Ryckebusch. I support the go-to-market organization at Guidewire as part of our value consulting team. So our team really specializes in partnering with insurers to help them to visualize and really unlock the full potential of a software investment. So we get to sit down and have conversations with stakeholders across a P&C organization, and I get to hear their challenges firsthand. We then get to help align their technology and business objectives, provide some guidance and insights on how to maximize value, and also map how they can find a path forward to achieving their strategic goals. So we conduct a series of discussions, interviews, and workshops, and we work firsthand with claims subject matter experts. So I really get to sit with folks who are focused, like yourselves, on leveraging analytics in ways to improve both their claims outcomes as well as their financial outcomes. Ryan?
Yeah, thank you. So we wanted to start off to get some feedback through a poll, and we're going to talk more about what these use cases actually are. But we wanted to, get a quick pulse at the beginning. For which of these analytics use cases do you see the greatest discrepancy between your organization's potential ROI, the potential benefit, and your status quo, what you're currently doing? So where do you see the biggest opportunity for improvement? And we've got an early leader for mitigating injury claim severity and litigation.
There we go, coming in, a few for fraud, and. 'and- 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 'and Severity in the lead.
None for Subro so far. So we'll get it. We'll get into whether that might be because there's a vote. Thank you. Somebody, a little love for Subro. There's two parts to this question, right? Is where's the benefit versus what you're doing or what the cost is. Alex, what are your thoughts on what you're seeing here and how it relates to how you talk to folks out there in the world?
We do get a lot of feedback around the ability to try to triage and mitigate the injury severity and litigation claims specifically. We do tend to hear a lot of feedback about Subro out in the field as well. So interesting to me that this is our smallest bucket here coming through.
Yeah, which is it could be because people have already taken some steps there. So we'll have another poll question related to that later. So we can move on, Stephanie, back to presentation, and go ahead, Alex.
Great. A quick look at our agenda. We are going to try to keep it pretty straightforward today. We have 3 themes we'd like to chat through with you. We'll discuss the key challenges that we hear in discussions with carriers. We'll talk through best practices and use cases, as well as measuring results achieved. And our goal for the session is to be as interactive as we can be. So you will see a few more polls coming through during our time together. Please share your feedback. As Stephanie mentioned, you'll also have the opportunity to ask questions, and we'll be able to address those at the end of the session. Let's go into the challenges. As I noted, I get to speak with many insurers, large and small. We speak with mid-sized mutuals, private and publicly held insurers. And what we really hear is you all face similar challenges. You amass a wealth of data, but you face similar hurdles. There's concerns about data integrity, being able to aggregate all of the data you have access to. We hear feedback about organizational silos and really challenges around trying to keep pace with the ever-evolving technologies that are available to you. Essentially, what we're hearing is the data is really no good to your claims management teams if they can't leverage it to affect change. So you'll see some snippets here, some feedback that we're able to gather in our discussions and interviews with carriers. And it's really my privilege to be able to sit down and chat directly with those who are at the forefront of these challenges. It's really one of the most interesting aspects of my role to be able to sit and conduct these side-by-side interviews. And it's great because I get to chat with claims experts ranging from supervisors to examiners, individual specialists, or even the analysts and developers who are starting that path of working on models and implementing use cases. Really, regardless of the size of the organizations that we sit down with, we hear a lot of similar challenges. So, we receive feedback that data exists and there's so much of it to comb through and mine, but there's not always a clear path to making it available for end users or at the desk level. We also hear that the data exists in all sorts of formats across the organization. And there's really a sense of these silos, not just in terms of being able to access the data, but also being able to get that cohesive buy-in to bring all the information together and really leverage it in your core system or your core application. We hear claims supervisors that are regularly concerned that they're missing out on opportunities, whether it be, subrogation identification or, the ability to investigate a fraud and identify the right claims and get them to the subject matter experts. We hear feedback that reports are being received, but they're not actionable in real time. There's, been some use case scenarios where they're getting a great report. They can see how they can make it actionable, but review of the data outputs is something that unfortunately ends up getting backburnered until someone with capacity can go in and review it. We also hear overall frustration from, those folks responsible for building out use cases and models and the reports that get issued out to the field. From a capacity standpoint, not every organization has someone whose full-time job is to work on these models. And from a user perspective, that information, even when it's available, is not in a helpful or usable format. So a lot of great feedback from the field, and we recognize that these are all challenges that you're probably considering or have considered in your path to leveraging and embedding analytics. Next slide, please. The discussions we're having with insurers today are really increasingly focused on addressing these key themes. What are you trying to solve? And these are really critical to not only enhancing your claims operations, but being able to actually create efficiency in your claims organization, as well as being able to impact and improve your key operating metrics. So some of the areas that we hear most that carriers are really trying to solve is around the data and modeling agility. They want to be able to quickly adapt and refine data models. They want to be proactive instead of reactive to market changes or trends that they're seeing within the claims organization. And they want to be able to really respond to emerging risks. The insight to identify here is really around, being able to have those actionable insights in a format that is usable to those within their teams. They want to be able to pinpoint opportunities for improvement and have insights that are actually leverageable to be able to change processes and put into place changes that improve claims handling and in turn impact the overall customer experience. The ability to identify and mitigate fraud. What we mostly hear folks are trying to solve is being able to spend time on the right claims without negatively impacting customer experience. From a litigation propensity, as well as the injury severity escalation, which we saw was a big area of interest from this group. It's again that proactivity versus responsiveness, and carriers being challenged with recognizing that speed is the key to these types of claims, and being able to have proactive management and the right reserving in place is something that's really crucial. And then for these last couple that we hear regularly, folks struggling to solve is model operationalization. They know they have the insights, they're sitting on all of this data, and they really want that advice on how to actually embed them into their day-to-day workflows, getting the information into the hands of the people who can really use it. And then finally, being able to measure their ROI. How do they justify not only in investing in some kind of mechanism to embed the analytics into their core systems, but being able to build out use cases, maintain their models. They really want to understand how do they learn from where they've been before, and how do they guide their future approach to leveraging analytics into their claims workflows, essentially wanting to work smarter and not harder. Passing it back over to you, Ryan, we wanted to share some of the best practices to address these challenges.
Indeed, which I tend to think of as how to escape the vortex of inertia and despair. We do find that thinking of this as a circle is helpful in the sense of not just like getting to the finish line and going, but that you're going to continue, whether it's with another use case or with improving the use case that you started with. There's always more to do, and that should be exciting and not not enervating and reason to despair. It also illustrates that there are a lot of different people that need to be involved, a lot of different roles in order to succeed. And even having just one example person in each one of these quadrants is probably a little bit of an oversimplification at that. There's even within these quadrants, there's probably several people who need to be involved. So the first two are fairly straightforward and fairly known issues, right? Which is not to minimize how difficult they are, because getting data out of your core system or melding it with external sources is not an easy task. Getting in a form where you can, build that predictive model, and some insurers have, especially on the claim side, on the actuarial side, you may have more people, but not always on the claim side. So sometimes there's a resourcing question or whether to do this in-house or to purchase models from outside. But the main point I want to make at the moment is not to really focus on the challenges of either of those, in which there's a lot of good helpful materials out there and good thinking, but that if you start by just solving those problems without thinking about how you're going to embed into workflow, about how you're going to measure your success and continue on with your improvement, then you often tend to get, even if you solve them, you tend to get bogged down at the end of step 2, because it's like, oh, now we have a model. That's great. That took us however many weeks or months. But now what do we do with it? So starting with the end in mind is crucial. How are we going to impact our workflow? Who is going to make a different decision because of the models that we create? How are they going to get that information? What are we going to automate maybe that we didn't before? So having that end in mind will help you not get stuck, even as you're slogging through some of the difficult issues in the first and second quadrants. And so, I'm showing an example of how we embed into our core system. The point is not how Guidewire does it. And in fact, the point is not whether exactly what you choose to put on the screen in terms of, for this particular use case, does it make sense to try and show influence factors or scores or estimates. It really is whatever is down here has to roll up to what's up here at the top. This is the crucial piece that because of the 2 models that we've looked at and the scores that came out of them, that in human terms, what we found is that the probability of a large loss is very low, and that claims like this tend to get resolved quickly. They don't bog down. So out of those 2 things, then organizationally we can say we want to fast track this claim, whatever that means, and that can mean increasing automation. It could mean a certain team that's staffed with less experienced folks, or the exact meaning of that may differ for your organization. But the point is that that's different from the counter example, which is top 10th of severe claims, expected lengthy resolution. Maybe this one actually, where if you're sending to an experienced adjuster, maybe they're more interested in some of these factors of like, 34 days between when this accident occurred and when we were told about it. In a 23-year-old vehicle, et cetera. Maybe that will help them put together some dots of like, okay, I kind of understand why this one was sent to me and how I need to go about investigating and intervening here. And then of course there's always in the middle of we're not sure. So this one's a subrogation example, where maybe the green you can automatically refer to subrogation, or the red not, but in the middle is where you say we need some human expertise. We need an adjuster, somebody from the subro team to look at this case in particular and make a decision. And we find that you're not limited to red, yellow, green, obviously, but we find that that's a very helpful paradigm to have in claims, especially because it's usually we can go left or we can go right, or we need somebody to decide because it's a case that isn't clear. So if once you have that workflow first implementation and mentality, then it leads to the next question of how do we know that we're actually making the difference that we intended to make? So again, starting from the beginning of the project to think, what are we going to measure and what are we going to call success? So there's some examples here of, in this case, total vehicle loss model. We wanted to bring down cycle time to a certain point. We wanted to bring down our expense ratio. We wanted to get better over time at predicting, whether it's one or the other, that we don't have people saying later, oh, you got that one wrong. So whatever those things may be for the particular use case, that going in at the beginning and in doing that operationalization that we were looking at in the core workflow, that there's the ability to say, am I impacting my KPIs? Often this is very important, not just in an academic sense of, did our ROI turn out higher or lower than we expected, but in a change management sense of being willing to trust that, decisions based, especially if you're automating, that decisions based on these models are not ruining everything. How do you know that the system isn't running wild without you? It's by having these kinds of dashboards where you can follow along and say, yeah, things are proceeding more or less as expected, or something seems to be going off track, and maybe we need to pull back. So this cycle in itself actually doesn't deal a lot with the change management aspect. That's kind of a whole nother layer on here of like how, the circle could refer to doing a pilot program where you, or you're, we said, if you want to move things to automation, maybe you start with just a tiny sliver of the things you're absolutely most confident about based on the modeling. And then when you see those dashboards and, you see that it's working, then you say, okay, we have the confidence as an organization to move that dial and send more things down that path. So that's another way you can think of this, as a continually improving circle. But Alex, you were telling me a story as we were preparing for this about a warning example of a insurer that didn't escape the vortex. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah. And in speaking with a particular carrier, they had indicated, and you probably saw on our quotes earlier on the slide, that their data had really become a big circle of pain. And what they were describing is exactly this: the inability to be able to escape this vortex. They would, get requests from the business of certain data points that they wanted to see. They'd spend a significant amount of time and effort to build out models and use cases to meet the ask of the business. They would then produce some kind of report, and the business would never actually pick up the report and put it into any type of operationalized aspect of their workflow. So this cycle kept going on and on, where they would create report after report after report that would never be utilized. So in this paradigm, they're not really thinking about the end state of how they can actually affect change and leverage the information that is being requested by the business. They're not able to really improve their processes in place because they're not getting any type of feedback as to how things are being used, and really what the next steps could be in terms of improving what those models look like. So they were stuck at this vortex in a circle, and described it as consistent pain. Yeah.
And my sense is that a few years ago, when we were talking with insurers about what they were doing with analytics and modeling, there was it was a sort of a nice to have, right? Of, oh, maybe we can make a few improvements, and maybe even a little bit of, oh, look at us being early adopters, or doing something that others aren't. Whereas I have the sense now that there's more of a feeling of like everybody is or ought to be doing more with claims analytics in order to get that edge. And if you get, as your example just indicated, if you get stuck in that vortex, then you're falling behind, and can actually make a difference to whether your business thrives or not. Is that your experience out there talking with folks?
Right. And it's if we're not staying in front of the trends and having that really proactive approach to leveraging what our historical data can tell us, you might start to fall behind your peers, not only from a competitive advantage perspective, but from your actual key performing metrics, right? We've seen a lot of challenges in our industry over the past several years, the impacts of COVID, supply chain challenges. Claims have gotten more and more expensive. Inflation is really high. So being able to optimize your processes, leveraging your resources in the smartest possible ways is really crucial. So not having these insights and consistently, creating those efficiencies is pretty impactful in the long run.
So in that light, let's go on to our next poll here, which is, thinking about that circle we were just looking at. What is your organization's greatest barrier to effective operationalization of analytics use cases? Is it what was at the top left with getting the data, top right, modeling, bottom right, embedding into workflow and business rules, bottom left, monitoring KPI impact and improving ROI? Or is it the meta problem of user trust and adoption?
Embedding in the lead. I've got a few.
Yeah, which is interesting. What we said of kind of skipping over A and B, right? Is I do feel like a lot of progress has been made in the last few years of people understanding the issues and tools that are available to help solve them. So it's still a headache, but it doesn't feel like like the absolute barrier or quandary that it once was. But I don't know, maybe that's, like I said, because I work directly with folks who are in the embedding phase. Maybe that's a little bit of a what do you call that, bias in the data of what I perceive. But it's what we seem to be seeing here. How does this match with your experience, Alex?
Yeah, the embedding and operationalizing is a challenge we hear a lot, and it's we know the data is there, and most companies do have a team of really adept analysts and developers who can create these reports. It's just I think there's not always a ton of experience as to how to actually make the change in your day-to-day to using that information. So there's probably a combination of that user trust and adoption. Change is hard for everyone, but the actual embedding action is not something everyone is super familiar with. So it's something I think there's still a lot of questions around and not as much experience.
All right, Stephanie, let's go back to the presentation and move on to what results are folks actually seeing as they work on these use cases.
Right. And, as we mentioned, one of the challenges that we hear is, how do we even go about quantifying the impact, right? It's not an easy thing to do to put these analytical insights into our workflow. It's going to take some kind of investment of resources and time to arrive at these outcomes. So how do we really need to look at the financial drivers and where we can influence change and where we will see that ultimately in our bottom line? So we encourage carriers to think about it, and especially as they're prioritizing what types of use cases they'd like to implement, really looking at how they would impact cost reduction. So is it, your claims processing costs? Are you utilizing one of these use cases to streamline processing or do some level of automation or partial automation? And really how you can baseline how that might impact reducing, the time spent on a claim, the types of labor involved, the resources that you need to utilize. We also would take into consideration in this cost reduction segment both the fraud and litigation potential. So again, identifying those types of claims early in the process, preventing fraudulent payouts, and also maybe looking at how that might impact your legal expenses overall, having that preventative insight to be able to contain that cost to some extent. From a loss mitigation perspective, going back again to early intervention, the earlier you can get in front of some of these more severe claims and mitigate the size of the loss is going to be helpful to lower your overall claim cost. Improved accuracy is another key area we would encourage from looking at the return. Setting claims reserves more precisely, giving you a better picture of your impacts to your book for future claims, and also being able to reduce the risk of underestimating or overestimating, and how that would impact overall financial stability. From this perspective as well, looking at the subrogation models and overall operational efficiency, it's how are we allocating our resources, optimizing their time, identifying high-risk claims, and assigning resources where they're most needed. So looking at our pool today and looking at how we can leverage the use cases to assign resources most appropriately. A competitive advantage is another area. And while this can be a trickier one to quantify, we know everyone's measuring the customer satisfaction score. People are most likely to shop their insurance provider following a claim. So it's really about that overall experience, the speed at which the claim is able to be processed, and looking at those things like cycle time and overall customer effort scores. And then finally, from a regulatory compliance perspective, this is another financial impactor that we can recommend to use a lens or in consideration for your use cases. So in improving the accuracy of your reporting and your documentation ultimately can reduce the risk of penalties and fines going forward. So we encourage, as you are considering implementing these various use cases, to take a look at what your key financial drivers might look like, and where you should start to consider your baselines and really capture how the use case can impact you over time. And we're going to dive into a few of the different use case examples here, share some insights as to how to look at it, as well as share some feedback from the field.
Yeah, so we're going to go back to the use cases that we talked about in the or put in the first poll, and build out this slide as we go, where we're basically moving from left to right in terms of where we see more customers start, and we'll talk about some of the reasons why, and what we're trying to indicate with the bars is what's the source of that benefit in relation to those four broad categories. So we were commenting on the poll at the beginning about not much love for subrogation, knowing that we were going to get to this slide where we actually see a lot of customers start with this. And I think the primary reason for that is that it's not an operational use case in the sense of affecting your customer satisfaction or expense directly. You have your whatever your statute of limitations is, you need to act within that time. Usually it's a separate team, or at least in many organizations it's a separate group that kind of takes referrals for subrogation and deals with that in a specialized way. So it's something that you can carve off usually into kind of a separate area, and the data is usually pretty straightforward to evaluate. You know from your historical data how much you've received, especially if you can connect your internal data with some external data, like vehicle characteristics from VIN lookup. We found very helpful. But anyway, it's a manageable modeling project for a use case that helps you found money and is not time sensitive, is what I'm trying to say. Not a time sensitive use case. So as far as the total size of the benefit, it may not be as large as some of these others that we're going to go to, but it's a often seen as a quick win, high benefit to cost, and especially risk. Right, if you're just getting started, the risk of messing something up in your operation by doing more or less subro referrals, everybody, okay, yeah, that's not a big concern the way that some others can be. Alex?
Yeah, and to share some examples, we hear a lot of feedback around the subrogation processes, and in some cases, there's still components of these processes that are super manual, right? We're relying on subject matter expertise to identify those opportunities, and then go through all of the processes to actually collect on that found money, right? So it's not always something that gets as much of the resourcing or the love, if you will, as it could for found monies. So, in one example, we could hear feedback about, just not having the staff or the time to, really ramp an individual to have the expertise to identify all of those opportunities. Or in some cases, seeing scenarios where subro opportunities on supplements are being completely missed and not having a process in place to go back and follow up on those. So when we're talking to customers about how this type of a use case can impact them. It's really around quantifying the increased identification of subrogation opportunities, the early intervention component, increased recovery via reduced leakage, as well as an efficiency gain for the folks on their subrogation team. So in talking with a kind of a small to mid-sized regional carrier, they estimated this could be a $500,000 to $700,000 per year impact to them by putting this type of a use case into place. So pretty impactful. And as Ryan noted, something that is a lot, the perception is it's a lot easier to put into place and is not something that's a burning situation.
Yeah, and a good point that in the short term, often your human resources are fixed, right? You have a certain number of people on the team. If you can use them more efficiently, if you can, point them to the cases that are most fruitful for them to work on, instead of having them thumb through files and pick them out themselves, then you're getting your advantage there. And in the longer run, then you can decide how many people does it make sense to have on this team. Do we want to put more folks in, like new one claims VP who said, I'm gonna put 2 more people on subro and I'm gonna track it every week in a report, and it worked out twice as well as expected because we weren't realizing that you're going through this year's subro cases, but then you still have time to go through last year's subro cases. So last year's subrogation numbers went way up because of that. So it could provide the justification for it does benefit exceeds the cost to add more people to the team, instead of having that mentality of, oh, well, we only have this many folks and they do what they can do. But that's where you start, by taking the folks that you do have and pointing them to the most efficient use of their time. So the next one we see very commonly is how to segment claims that are first coming in. And this one is something that like everybody knows and agrees, like, oh, if you can get the claim to the right person, or split the claim, often with more complex claims than having somebody handle physical damage versus injury, or obviously depends on the line of business. But you can affect all 4 of these areas by not paying more than you need to, by reducing the expense of shifting around and reassigning, getting salvage or subro recovery faster, and that customer satisfaction piece of resolving claims quicker and with less runaround. And maybe this is where I should stop and say that the numbers on the left scale are meant to be indicative of the approximate impact we see in terms of dollars per $100 of claim in indemnity. They are exemplary in, it's not a rigorous, but in working with folks and hearing their stories, and Alex actually does a lot more work with spreadsheets where people are trying to quantify this, but we're trying to give examples of how these stack up relative to one another. And I think what's interesting there is this idea of putting customer satisfaction on a monetary scale, which, as I mentioned, my economics background, I love to think in terms of, well, you're always willing to trade off one thing for another at a price. It's a very economist-minded way of thinking about it. But as you all know, and as Alex mentioned, right, the impact of people's claims experience on whether they stay with your company, whether they recommend it to others, it is ultimately going to come back to the bottom line in terms of your long-term growth, retention, and profitability. So it's almost like maybe a little homework assignment, so to speak, to take out of this, of think about how you would quantify customer satisfaction. How would you say, oh, this is worth doing because we'll get this benefit, in a way that's not just a finger to the air, but something that you can rely upon to make decisions. But to come back to segmentation, it does, it may need more than one model, because you could be modeling cycle time, complexity, severity, likelihood of total loss, likelihood of severe injury. Again, it'll depend on the exact line of business as well. So it's a little harder to coordinate, but it's pretty much everybody knows you're going to get some benefit in each of these four areas, and therefore worth doing. And it applies to everything, right? So subrogation only applies to a certain segment of claims. Segmentation, and we'll talk about that for some of the other use cases, segmentation is something you're doing on every single claim. So the benefit, I say the dollar benefit, is sort of within that realm of, which claims this is relevant to, and segmentation is relevant to everything. So, Alex?
Yeah, and for this particular use case, as we're having the conversations and folks are looking at, what is the financial impact? It's looking at the underlying models that you would take into consideration, and they are factoring it in toward concepts of some kind of straight through processing or partial automation. They're also really looking at and honing in on what is the cost and the frequency that reassignment is happening. And that's really a strong way to try to quantify that impact. Are we getting, these claims to the right resource at the right time? And what's great too is, and I think we mentioned it a little bit earlier, is being able to use it as a little bit of a barometer, so that you can, really get that understanding of how well the use case is performing, and use that to tweak up or tweak down, automation as you're starting to get into that space, and understanding the claims that maybe don't require as high a touch as you thought. This also can be really, really impactful for, training new staff that are coming in and gaining their expertise. Can we segment and route certain assignments to certain user types, and get them more proficient and work them up to the right level of expertise? So we see a lot of different ways of quantifying the impacts of utilizing these segmentation use cases.
So our third use case is the one that was most popular at the beginning, and for good reason, as you see the bars jump up here. How much injury you have as part of your total claim book, whether in auto or workers' comp, obviously will affect whether your interest in this particular scenario. But within this realm, it is really not unusual to see 10% and higher improvements that folks make, both in the indemnity side by getting in and settling claims sooner, and not letting things escalate, as well as on the expense side, because once something goes to litigation, as you all know, your expenses are through the roof. So those tend to be the main two models that customers are using and insurers are using as well to try and impact is something around likelihood of litigation or attorney representation, and something around what is the ultimate severity. Not in order to provide exact settlement numbers. Again, that the point here is not on the exact estimate, but on that workflow impact of, like we saw the example. This looks like it's in the top 10th or the top quartile. And out of that, we want to get the right person to evaluate it, not to take some number that comes from a model and turn that into an offer sheet, but to evaluate the claim holistically now that it's been brought to my attention as an expert adjuster.
And to give a quick example, a commercial carrier using a claim severity escalation solution gave us some feedback that they were able to, estimate about an 8 to 9% reduction in average severity. They were able to decrease the average claim age by 30 days. And what they found was there were fewer handoffs among the adjusters. They were able to lower the loss adjustment expense, and there were fewer mistakes happening in the process. So just some feedback on a commercial carrier going through that process to implement a use case.
Yeah, as a side note as well, this is often a good one where a batch process for evaluating claims is helpful, precisely because you're often waiting for information to come in. Somebody's got to go to an appointment and they miss it, and so on, right? So it kind of slips off your screen. And sometimes the most important thing to know about a claim is that nothing has changed and that it's now 90 days old and we still don't have these pieces of information so some way of scoring that's not just dependent upon somebody changed something in the system, which is the normal way to trigger an analytics solution in most use cases. But to say, at certain points we want to evaluate how has this claim aged, and maybe it's a different model that you run at 15 or 30 days when you expect a certain amount of information to be available versus what you run at 90 days, where you either expect more information available, or if it's missing at that point, that in and of itself is a key indicator that modern modeling techniques can pick up on. The next one, vehicle total loss, again within the area of collision, first party vehicle coverage tends to be a pretty valuable one. But the interesting one here is that we're starting to get something in the negative area, and that often is a reason why this pushes to the right, because of that concern about we're going to overpay for vehicles that we automatically send to salvage based on a model, and we could have repaired it for less. And that really needs to be balanced against these other bars that are heading in the positive direction of we're not towing cars to repair shops and then being told it needs to be salvaged and towing it again. We're not putting things into storage, and we can get the salvage dollars faster and maybe be able to get more of them if we prioritize it. And then of course that customer satisfaction element is especially large when it comes to, hey, I'm out of a vehicle, and I either, if it's going to be repaired, I want it done quick. If it's not, I want to be able to go get my new car, right? At a very emotional moment, as we all know, and I'm sure some of us have experienced a collision claim that way. So I think the main exhortation here is to not overemphasize that bottom piece of what could go wrong in certain cases if we automate more of our processes based on models, but to look at the bigger picture, and is that holistic picture of where we could be better than what we're doing today.
Right. And an example of how a carrier might want to measure that is some of those components Ryan just mentioned, right? Like, are we able to have a savings on our total storage costs or our tow costs? What is our speed to resolution? We've had, carriers with certain targets around, as soon as that loss is identified, we want to be able to cut a check in a certain time period and make sure that is moving along the process to help with that customer satisfaction component. And they've gone through this experience and they just want to be able to move on. So those are all different ways in which you'd be able to baseline and start to see the return of that type of a model.
And we do want to leave time for questions, so we'll go a little quicker through this last one, just to say everyone knows fraud is a huge problem and therefore a huge opportunity if you can, take a bite at it with better identification and referral to SIU and et cetera. It also tends to have that issue, though, of having the downside of it's more expensive to investigate and go after, as well as then the interesting piece is that, that customer satisfaction can go negative, right? If you're investigating more people than the ones who, really aren't fraudulent could, have a poor experience. But again, in light of what you can save in indemnity, that's probably an issue that can be addressed and mitigated. Anything to add, Alex?
Examples on that one, again, we can see quite a range in terms of the expected or quantifiable benefit. Being able to reduce something like a litigation expense. We've heard estimates, from 500,000 to $1 million a year, depending upon which type of use case they're going to put into place. So this can be a big area of impact and savings as you're considering embedding, these types of models into the day-to-day.
So with that, let's go to our final poll and come back to these same use cases that we had in the first poll and just discussed. In terms of, we said this is what we usually see as from left to right in terms of popularity, but that can be for a lot of reasons, not all of them good in terms of what customers are up for and able to do. So where do you see the greatest opportunity across these use cases? And
pretty even.
Yeah, pretty even so far. We're getting a little more love for Subro.
Yeah.
Like Stephanie said at the beginning, these are not recommendations. We're just reporting what we see. But still, the bumping up there in the late votes, the injury claim and severity still similar to what it was at the beginning.
Yeah.
And like I said, for good reason. If that's a main part of your book, then focusing there is definitely makes a lot of sense and can make a big impact.
Big impact and definitely worth the investment in that effort to embed the use case directly and start to reap some of those benefits.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for participating in the polls and hearing us out. We'd be happy to take any questions. Stephanie?
Yes, thank you so much. Hang on just a moment, please. Okay, so if you have any questions for Alex and Ryan, please submit them to the live Q&A feature on the right side of your screen. We'll address as many questions as time allows. And we do have a few waiting for us. What would you say is the difference between what you talked about today and ChatGPT or AI?
Yes, everybody's interested in well, AI can be used to mean a lot of different things, right? I think in the current cultural conversation, it tends to be confused more or narrowed down to mean generative AI or things like ChatGPT. But sometimes it's just used to mean any kind of machine learning and modeling. So I think where we are talking about implementing structured models, right, where you're predicting a certain thing, and out of that prediction, you want to take a certain action. So you don't want to ask ChatGPT, what's the likelihood that this claim will be over $100,000, right? And trust its answer. So in terms of those, very focused insurance questions, you probably want to go more with structured models, but take advantage of all of the techniques that are out there that were have been developed in recent years. I think where generative AI can come in, and again, you hear the cultural conversation around this, is sort of like as a workflow partner, reminding you that, hey, this model ran, and maybe you should act upon it. And as a solution to what we call activity fatigue, right? A lot of times the solution or the way you implement these models is to say, oh, it was red, so send an activity to Alex to look at it. And if Alex is getting activity after activity, then it's hard to keep up with them all. So the option for Gen AI to be able to sort through all that and help you with, this is the most important thing for you to focus your expertise on now.
And our next question is, if you ran an insurance company, what would you target first?
You want to take that, Alex?
I know it didn't score as high as the rest of the categories, but I think I would take the subrogation approach first. I think it's low risk, and there can be a really significant financial impact. So it's also great for learning, for getting your process into place, and it's great for someone who hasn't made an attempt yet. So I think I'd go with subro. How about you, Ryan?
I've got a special love for vehicle total loss that got 0% in our final poll there, just because I think so many people are scared away from it because of that sense of, ooh, what if we're sending things down the wrong path. And I think there really is an opportunity for some pretty significant expense reduction, especially, and customer satisfaction that people are missing out on because of that understandable but ultimately quantifiable concern about salvaging vehicles that could be repaired. But and then the severity one that did get all the votes, similarly, again, if that's a major part of your claim expense, then definitely worth considering as a place to start, even though it may involve multiple models and take a little more time to work through, but huge impact available.
Thank you both. It looks like we have time for one more question. This attendee noted that they have many silo teams across the organization. Do you have any suggestions for how to get the teams to come together and invest in embedded analytics?
You work with that a lot, Alex.
Yeah, I'd say the being able to facilitate the discussion is always challenging, right? Different interests from different parts of the organization, but bringing together both the business and your technology teams who are supporting the effort is going to be crucial. Getting to understand each other's challenges and what you've attempted and seen so far can often be really eye-opening. A lot of times we sit down and have these conversations, and one team doesn't know what the others even tried or what kind of frustration or pain points that they have in place. So bringing everyone together is definitely the first step. And building out, really what these use cases are, where you see the biggest opportunity, and having those conversations to say, we'd really like to try this. This is where we can influence change, and here's our baseline. This is where we're starting. Let's see where we can get to.
Yeah, and I would add the folks that you didn't see on our circle were executive sponsor, project manager, the folks who really provide the support for why are we doing this in the first place, and how are we going to get there, what are our preliminary estimates of ROI that we're going to track to. So, in the end, it may sound a little simplistic, but like Alex said, get everyone in the room, agree what the ultimate goal is and how you're going to get there, and then execute on that instead of, well, I'm a data engineer, so I think the most helpful thing I can do is do this project to get this out of the core system, right? Because that's my job. If everybody's just doing those things separately, then you're not going to coordinate to get around.
Hang on, I had something else just come in. Let me see if I can read this. Okay, it's kind of a bit more of a comment, but I'll let you address it. Sadly, as much effort and information you provide to both your character, SIU, and the DOBI, at the very end of the day, there's little that it's ever done. It's simply the same frustrating result where judges, mediators, and attorneys involved essentially just want to move things along, dockets, caseload, and just put money on it. Fraud is rampant and will never be reined in. As a former property casualty and SIU team leader, I have no solution. Any last comments or words of advice there?
It's a huge problem, like, and deserving of it's not just its own webinar, but a whole series, right? I guess all I can say is, like, within that context, what can you move, right? What can you achieve that would help and make a difference? And maybe that's there's a reason it was out there on the right. Maybe that could be, you decide, for all the problem it is, the solution doesn't give us the benefit as much as focusing on these other things. That could be a clear-eyed answer. Alex, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's as you said, it's something that we could probably talk about for a really long time, but it's, what can we control? And that's, how much time and energy and resourcing that your organization is spending on it, and optimizing what time you do spend. So it's making sure that you're, focusing as best you can your experts that are going to be able to catch that potential, and also, not spending time where it's not worth it. And that's something that, you have to decide your appetite for.
All right. Thank you both. I know we've gone a bit over time, but thanks to Ryan and Alex for taking time to share their knowledge and expertise. And thanks to all of you for attending this webinar. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.